Good evening, Forest families, and thank you so much for joining us for another one of our prep school webinars. We are really pleased to welcome you today because today we're talking about restorative practice and children's behaviour, and that always works best when school and home work together. Tonight's webinar is about restorative behaviour practice, and I'm joined by Miss Verity Handyside and Mrs. Anaman Lanjit. We're talking about why it matters and how children can thrive academically and emotionally. When we talk about behaviour, we're not just talking about what children do, we're talking really about how they communicate. Behaviour is often a signal of how your child is feeling, what they're experiencing, or what they might need in that moment. In these moments, they're not choosing to behave badly, they're struggling to cope with something. And traditionally, behaviour has been managed solely through consequences alone. Whilst consequences can stop behaviour in the short term, we believe they don't always teach children how to do better next time, and they can be damaging to some relationships along the way. And this, for us, is where restorative practice comes in. So we're going to be explaining about how we use restorative practice in our school, how it supports accountability and pupils' long-term development, and why it's especially important for inclusion and neurodiversity. So thank you again for being here, and we're really looking forward to the discussion this evening, and I'm going to kick things off with the first question. So, question to you both, it's like mastermind, don't worry, there's no right and wrong. What is behaviour? How do we define behaviour, do you think?
Well, I think it's important to understand that behaviour is a neurological response to something. So it's something that happens inside our brains, and it's the brain responding to an overwhelming situation or an experience, and it's those emotions that we carry create that feeling of overwhelm, and then that's what impacts and creates that behaviour. And I think, so effectively it is stemming from feelings, emotions, from needs that we have, and so it's important to understand that it is something that isn't to be controlled, and that we can't control that behaviour in the immediate moment, because it is something that's a chemical reaction as a response to something that's in our brains.
Going against the traditional sort of "you are naughty" type.
Yeah,
response.
Exactly, and I do think that part of what we'll definitely talk about later is this idea of separating the child from the behaviour, because it isn't, you are not that behaviour. That behaviour is something that's happening. As a response to something else. I think it's really important to remember it's as a response to something else.
Yeah, and I think it's important that it is a communication, that they are telling us, I don't feel safe, or I feel overwhelmed, or this is too hard, or I don't know how to ask for help, and really unpicking that and understanding what their needs really are, and taking the time to look at that, to know that when they behave a certain way, they are telling us something.
Yeah.
And I think
Really
you'd originally asked about, we talked about the idea that there are certain myths around behaviour, and we use that word myth because we grew up, and I'm sure it's the same with everyone, you grow up with these ideas of what behaviour is or what it should be, and I suppose the main myth is that children are not deliberately doing these things to annoy us. It might feel like that sometimes, but it is not true. It's a response, a neurological response. Another myth is that it's not fully controllable, so we can't expect children to be able to control that behaviour, because that's not possible. And
many
also,
adults sometimes.
Exactly. And also the idea that it's not really the child's fault, and it's not the child's issue to solve or kind of fix on their own, and they do need this. That's where we come in, and where parents at home come in, because they are young children, and they need our help to understand and figure it out. And actually, that prefrontal cortex of your brain is not fully developed until you're 25, and that's the part of your brain that makes logical decision making, communication, planning. That part of your brain isn't actually formed at all fully until you're 25. So if you think about it in that context, it makes it really clear.
I think as well, as parents, sometimes we think they should know better, and every situation is different, and how they reacted in one situation can be completely different to how they've reacted this time or last time. Sometimes we think, well, if we have enough rules, or if we have enough rewards and consequences, or if we're firm enough, that will sort children's behaviour. And as Mrs. Clark said at the beginning, that might stop it right there and then, but that might not stop it from happening again. So it's really looking at how we can give pupils children the tools to help them navigate this behavior and navigate for them to identify, this is how I'm feeling. I don't have the words for it, so I'm reacting like this. But next time I can do this.
Yeah, and you're and it's different every single time, isn't it? And we quite often will have parent conversations where they say, oh, they wouldn't do that at home, or they didn't do it, that happened before and they didn't react like that, or whatever it is. But every experience is different, I suppose, isn't it, as well? So restorative practice then, it is, do some myth busting for us.
I think the big thing is it's not an excuse for behavior. When we talk about it, when we've been talking more about it this year, it doesn't mean we're excusing behavior, but actually we're looking at how we can build relationships with pupils and how we can create that sense of belonging, that sense of safety and trust. And really, if we have that relationship with the child, we can then say it's okay. We understand that's how you're behaving. You're trying to tell us something. So it's not just saying, yeah, you can behave like that. That's fine, and then leave it at that. So that's definitely not what it is.
Yeah, it's a culture. So the school is now part of our school culture, which is great, and it's the culture around discussing and understanding behaviour, and then how we can, and this includes discussing it with the children, of course, definitely. That's kind of the main tenet, isn't it, of restorative practice, that it's a partnership with the child. It's not us making decisions about how we respond to behaviours that have happened. It's about engaging with the children and having that relationship together to understand that behaviour and that long-term vision of future-proofing. So giving the children in our care the tools to be able to reduce the number of times that might happen in the future. And it's not, an immediate fix where that will never happen again. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. There's the analogy of you touch the boiling hot iron or kettle when you're a child and you don't do that again because you learn from that. There's those instances, but then there are others where it does take more time. But because we know it's a neurological kind of conversation behaviour, the more that positive responses and positive outcomes come from a repeated activity, that neurological pathway is built, which means that the next time the child will expect, it creates that positive anticipation. It can go negatively too. So if a child, for example, needs to go to the toilet and they ask to go to the toilet and they're not allowed to go, the number of times then the next time they ask to go to the toilet, their brain will make them think, I'm not going to be allowed to go, or it makes me feel bad that I need to go to the toilet. Whereas obviously we allow children to go to the toilet when they need to go to the toilet, and then that creates a positive neural pathway. So every interaction we have around behaviour
is meaningful.
Exactly, and in the long term, and actually has a huge impact on the children that we nurture and their future as adults, as behaviour systems we experience as children ourselves has had on us.
I think I've seen recently as well. I think everybody's really embracing this and trying to take it on board. And we've been doing drop-ins, haven't we, into other teachers' lessons, and which for those of you not in the know, it's what it says in the tin. You drop in on somebody's lesson and you get a snapshot of what's going on. And I've seen a lot of teachers doing the practice where you're ignoring the low-level whatever's going on, but you are outwardly making a really big deal about the good stuff. Well done, Miss Handyside, you're sitting really nicely, and that sort of overt positive reinforcement of the good
Definitely
enormously diminishes what shouldn't be going. And then you just see the children just all going, well, I want a bit of that, I'm going to sit down and get my book out and do whatever it is,
I think that one of the big shifts as well is when something is not quite right, that we're moving away from the why did you do that, why, and actually us thinking, what is happening here, what are you trying to say, who's been affected, how can we put things right. So it's moving away from that shaming that you've done something you weren't supposed to do, because it's the understanding that you're trying to tell us something. And so it's not so much the why, but more of the tell me what's happened as it was happening. What were you feeling? What were that it then helps unpick what's happened instead of why did you do that? There's your sanction.
That's so naughty.
Yeah. Well, it's being curious about what's going on behind this, and having that empathy and that kindness, and compassion for children who, you know, in our school range from 4, which is just so incredibly young. And they have so much going on. You know, the cognitive kind of workload that they have just being at school every day is huge. And if you throw into the mix different ways that brains work and different responses to different scenarios, comfort levels, whatever, it makes sense that actually we need to be guiding and helping and supporting in a positive way. As adults, we would absolutely expect to be treated in that way by our peers in our workplaces. And I think sometimes putting yourself in the shoes of the children and saying, oh, if I was at work and I needed to go to the toilet and I wasn't able to go, how would I feel? And I think that's really important for us to understand behaviour and have that empathy with our children that we look after.
I think something as well that's worth noting, that it is very much a proactive way of working with children as well. So creating those relationships, checking in with pupils so that they're aware of the emotions. So if we know that someone has come in feeling quite sad or upset and they've had a check-in, then we might expect certain behavior. So we can help support that. We can help before they react. We can put things in place to help support them to get through that. And we're very much, you know, with our curriculum, with Journey of Hope, with our one-to-one interventions, we're very much that we all feel emotions. All emotions are fine. The way you react to them, that's what we work on. And that's, you know, a lot of work gets put into that before things happen.
And I think that's where the homeschooling comes in as well, isn't
definitely.
it? You know, those of you watching, hopefully there's a few, you know, keep us appraised of any changes at home, any familial things going on, or, you know, upset over the weekend, that sort of thing. It's really important for us to know that, because then we can make our adjustments at our end. And like Mrs. Malangic was saying, you know, do those check-ins, get people to keep an extra eye out, whatever it may be. You know, that's the behaviour. The way we approach behaviour at school and the way parents approach behaviour at home probably isn't enormously different.
No.
It's just we need to have a continuous conversation about it all the time.
I think also understanding that for the child, the emotion they're feeling is real and it is big and it can be big. And although for us, the reason why they're having that emotion might not be a big deal, remembering that for them it's real and it's big and it is overwhelming and sometimes all-consuming. And the number of times I have my daily check-in with my class and there'll be an angry or a sad emotion ticked, and we talk about why. And, you know, they might say something like, my dad woke me up and I didn't want to get up this morning. And obviously for us, it's so easy to just be like, oh, well, that's fine. Just let's
you'll
go.
be right.
That's just life.
Yeah.
But actually for that child, like, you know, that is a huge thing. Or maybe it's that I didn't get to give my mum a proper hug when we left because we were in a rush. And again, it doesn't seem like a big thing to us, but those children hold on to that. And actually just the very act of telling a grown-up that they trust that this is how they're feeling, and hearing advice and being, oh, you know, I really appreciate that must have been really difficult for you this morning. I'm so sorry. I don't like feeling rushed either. What we could do now to cheer ourselves up, we could go in the calm corner, we could read with our friend, and giving them those at that toolkit. And obviously I'm talking in the first instance at the lower end of the school, but the idea is that we put those in place early on and it becomes automatic service as the children
and
get
building
older.
on their emotional literacy, you know, that's not an innate ability that they have. You know, we have to teach the children how to be able to talk about their emotions and identify their emotions and all those different things. So like you said, they are saying, I feel this because, you know, that's a massive deal. It's not just an automatic thing. And as they move through the school, you know, we've got sessions go on in the corner, like you said, Anna, we've got place to be, place to talk, all those different, but it involves talking and it involves having the oracy and the skills to be able to do that. And we need to be teaching that from, you know, the lowest part of school.
I think it's important as well that sometimes you just validate that I hear that you're upset because this happened in the morning, and it doesn't mean we have to fix it. We have, you know, we have tools and we try to equip the children with the tools that they can go and help themselves as well. But sometimes just validating the way they're feeling can help.
Yeah, just as important, right? Yeah.
And I think in a nutshell, you've got the restorative practices if it's about nurturing and compassion and being curious and building a relationship, on the flip side, if you're thinking about, okay, but why does that other system not work? It's worked for decades across the country. That fractures relationships. So when when there's a punitive consequence given, it's a blunt line. It fractures that relationship. There's becomes uncertainty, maybe mistrust, and it takes a while to build that back in. You can build that trust back in. It just has to be done quite quickly. And I think actually that the research now and the evidence around how brains work, we now know obviously so much more about neurology than we did 50, 60 years ago. And so it makes sense that the behaviour support systems move with those times and that understanding, and that we are making sure that we're building skills and building relationships and not fracturing them.
No. I'll chuck in another metaphor though. We don't need a sledgehammer to crack a nut, do we?
Exactly.
It's just it's sometimes it's go slow, go softer.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what does this look like here then at Forest? How are we linking this, in practical terms that parents might want to know? What does that actually mean?
So I think, as I said, it's something that we do all the time, and we do it proactively and reactively. When we have to react, we have our behaviour policy and the systems put in place, and that's very much those reflective conversations, asking the pupil not a why, but what's going on. Is there something you need? What's happened? Hearing everybody's voice in, say, something has happened in the playground or what have you. And really acknowledging that each individual has a different story, each individual has the right to be heard.
And that's on the website, right? The behaviour policy,
yes. And looking at how we can repair that. And I think that's one of the biggest things, is if there is this falling out, or if we've had some misbehaviour, how to really repair that relationship. And, I think parents at home probably have this, if you have an argument with your child or what have you, how are you repairing that? We're not forcing children to say sorry. We are encouraging them to repair, maybe through sorry, maybe through some other means, but understanding that it is the behavior. It's not the child, it's the behavior, and we're here to help support them move through that, and make sure that they, that they're well liked, well known. And
I think we do a lot as well of encouraging them and going, well, but how do you think when you did X, or when this happened, how do you think that person felt? I think we do a lot of that kind of conversation as well, trying to encourage the empathy and the sort of understanding about cause and effect, and words, actions, whatever it might be, have consequences, but walking in someone else's shoes is equally as important. So I think we do quite a lot of that.
And I think it's nice because we do set that time aside to make sure we have those conversations with individuals. So if it is something that's happened with a few children or a group of children, giving them the opportunity to hear what the other person has to say, how they felt in that situation, what they could have done next time, or what they could have done and what they're going to do next time moving forward.
I think the not rushing for a sorry is a really important point to think about, because it's so ingrained in us and so automatic. Oh, you bumped into what? No, say sorry.
What'd you say?
What'd you say? And you kind of think, obviously, that's a coming from a positive place. But actually, the number of times you then hear children go sorry, and you're like, well, I don't think you meant that. And it's like, well, no, they didn't.
Like you mean it.
They didn't understand it, and that's actually a national cultural response, especially being British.
We're going to come to it in a little bit, but not everybody has the same understanding of that. My son's neurodiverse. He was diagnosed when he was quite young with ADHD, and something that he found really difficult was saying sorry. Just physically saying the word. And we battled for hours and hours when he was 3, 4, 5. Now of course I know much better than I did then, but for some children that's a really difficult thing to do.
And there are different ways that children and some adults can say sorry without saying the word sorry. Whether it's just an arm on the shoulder, or kind of a snuggling in and having, those kind of, or
sharing something.
Exactly. There are different ways, and I think rushing it. Obviously, there is the chance for us in those restorative conversations. Another reason why they're great is that we can make suggestions. Like sometimes when we hurt someone, or sometimes when we snatch, we might want to say sorry to show the other person that we feel badly and we know that we should have done better, etc. If you feel like you're ready to say sorry, that, you know, I will leave you to do that. But you don't instruct them to do it. You just float the idea. And if they're not ready, they're not ready. And that's part of the compassion, because it's understanding that those children are not ready. And so I think definitely that's another homeschool kind of a fluid idea, that it works in both settings, and it's really important.
And I think as adults we have to model that. So whether
100%.
we're at school or whether we're at home, really modeling that repair, that knowing, you know, if you're at home and you've had a big fallout, that you repair that. Don't ignore it and just hope that it gets better and you just forgot about it. You know, address it, have that conversation. And then, as Verity said, you know, discuss saying sorry. Don't force anyone to say sorry. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a hug. Maybe it's let's go and watch, you know, some TV and have some ice cream. But knowing that you have repaired that and you can move forward now. And then remembering that that's been dealt with. You know, we start our day, that every day is a fresh start.
We don't need post-mortems.
No,
or
and you don't need to keep going back to it. Do you remember what you did?
Yeah.
Keep doing.
Well, because they actually won't remember 9 times out of
don't.
10. Often when children are in that moment of escalation, there's a lot of research and evidence on the fact that they can't remember what they say, they can't remember what they do, they lose control over those functions, and actually it takes a really long time for the de-escalation to happen. And actually it's not even when the de-escalation is happening that we can have any input or any impact. It's well after. It takes a really long time for children to be ready to hear anything. So having that reflective conversation isn't us diving in the middle of something and being like, let's talk about this now. Is actually having that sort of 90-second pause, and then maybe we'll come back to this in a little while when it's appropriate, and knowing that that's the child when they're at their readiest to hear is really important.
Yeah, because you can't, if they're not regulated, they can't hear what you're saying. So that, you know, at school, take a couple of minutes, go into the quiet area, maybe read a book, help them calm down, help them with some breathing exercises, just giving them some time on their own. When you think about your child at home, is it where they're going to their bedroom and just having some quiet time? Are they screaming into a pillow? Are they, you know, watching a program that kind of helps them calm down? Before we do anything, we have to make sure that they've calmed down. Otherwise, they're not going to hear us.
And every parent will have had the tantrum or the, you know, the whatever we want to call it. Every parent knows what that looks like, and you're desperate to fix it, but you know, we all need to.
Just makes it worse, doesn't it?
Right,
It just escalates
Trying
it
to
further.
do things in the moment at that second is not helpful to anybody.
And actually, you need to be regulated yourself in order to best
Start
support.
modelling again,
Because obviously a lot of, and I imagine at home, possibly at home much more so than at school, a lot of these behaviours or these situations can be a real trigger for us. And if you are triggered, you're escalated, you're not going to give the best support possible. And again, modelling, but also just making sure that you're safeguarding yourself and them and from making things worse, and having that kind of, just gonna take a moment for myself. If I'm ready to help, I'm ready to help. If I'm not, I can't help. I think also with going back to the idea of what we're doing at school with restorative practice, I think the training that staff have all had on, and teaching staff and all staff have had on this, basically you're shifting the narrative from, you know, what is the behaviour? Okay, they're fidgeting. Oh no, they're fidgeting. This is not what you should be doing. Here's a consequence. To saying, okay, we can see you're fidgeting, but actually what's happening underneath is that you're uncomfortable. You know, you're too hot. Oh, maybe you can take off your jumper. Or, you know, there's the behaviour we see, and then there's the behaviour that's actually happening. And because the staff know that, we're able to kind of, you know, our brains are pinging constantly, like, oh, that could be, or maybe it's this, or maybe it's that, and asking the child if they're a bit older, so that we're separating the behaviour we see, whether it's calling out, for example, or as I said, like swinging on their chair or messing with things. That's not it. That's just a symptom of it. And it's learning what we are.
It's not describing how they're feeling when they're doing whatever it is they're doing. It's it's the two things have come together in that way, isn't it?
And some of them are easier than others. You know, fidgeting because you need to go to the loo, that's a quick fix. Refusing to do something is a harder fix, but the refusal is still the behaviour we see. It's not the issue.
No,
it's still a symptom of what's going deeper into that.
And on that, I think, you know, quite often Anna and I will have conversations with parents about very often about sanctions or about behaviours that have happened. I think it's, you know, it's an obvious ask as a parent to say, well, such and such happened, what's the sanction going to be? Or that, you know, there could be worries about sanctions or consequences or whatever it is. I would say definitely take a look at the new behaviour policy, because we have, you know, it's changed significantly, hasn't it? And I think it's changed for the better.
Definitely.
And, you know, you need to have read it to understand it. We're always happy to talk about it and explain it further. But whilst it might feel sometimes as if, you know, the sledgehammer to crack the nut type sanction is the best thing, I think often there has to be that trust between home and school that we know what we're doing, and, you know, we would be approaching something in a certain way because that's how it needs to be approached.
And we have the child's best in, like, everything we
All
do
of
is
the
about the
children's
children.
best interest.
Exactly. And it will only ever be
Yeah.
every decision is made with the children in mind,
Yeah.
of course.
And they are
Absolutely.
children. They are
Yeah.
young. They are
Yeah.
very small. Like you said, some of them are very small.
Yeah.
You know, everything has to be proportionate and calm and sensible and working with home. You know, to get to the end point. I think.
Is having that really high expectation, but with high support. So
Yeah.
we have high
Yeah.
expectations of
And we
behaviour.
really do have
And
very high
and
expectations.
now we have really high expectations of emotional literacy as well. You know, we do. You know, I obviously teach in year 1, and of course I now have an expectation that children in my class can talk about their emotions because we've taught it. But we wouldn't just go in with those high expectations with no support. But this, what are the behaviour practices in the school now does is have that high support to match it. So it is very kind of hands on as an approach. You know, it is much easier to just be like, right, do this or do that, or, you know, time out. And it is more hands-on, but it is that support that needs to go with the high expectation. And I think, as we said at the beginning, it's not that we've relaxed the expectations. In fact, in some ways, they're actually higher because we're expecting quite a lot from them cognitively, of understanding-wise. So
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So I have lunchtime reflections, and it's an opportunity to delve into behavior and how children are feeling at the time and what have you. And I had 2 pupils recently in for physicality. So we have here any physicality, we go straight to a lunchtime reflection and we talk about it and what have you. And when I was speaking to both pupils, they were talking about the behavior, and they said, well, I did this after they did that because I thought they did that on purpose. And the other one said, I did that because I thought they did on purpose. And so we kind of had this discussion about trust and why it was, you know, why were we feeling people were doing it on purpose if we had no reason? And if we were friends, what did that mean? And it was really interesting to unpick, and it was really interesting for them to hear each other say what they had to say. And then we made this plan going forward, okay, you know, and it might be next time that they still react, or next time they might think twice and think, you know, is this person doing it on purpose, or is it an accident? And
but they're the occasions when you hope that they're then going to remember that conversation.
Well, that's that
Mrs.
neurological
Manhadjic
part,
going, oh,
yeah,
actually,
yeah,
what did
exactly.
Mrs. Manhadjic say
Yeah.
about not reacting and have a think? And, you know.
because even if it's that adage, isn't it? It's that even if it's just 1% better every day, think how far you'll come in half a year, in half a term, even in terms of understanding. So
And so that's why I think it's really important that we've made time and, you know, made time for those reflective conversations, those lunchtime reflections. Even detentions and exclusions, everything is set, it's timetabled in terms of how can we get the most out of a session to help repair and improve behaviour.
And, you know, the most serious behaviours, or, you know, whatever we're calling them, there are still those higher order sanctions, if you like, or consequences in our policy. But, you know, on a day-to-day basis, that's not the sort of behaviours we deal with.
no.
We're very fortunate here, and I think our behaviour expectations, like you say, they are extremely high, but it's a continuum that they're on every day from the day they start. So in a way, it's all they're going to know when they're here, which I think is helpful.
Because ultimately, you know, our role as educators at this point in a child's life is to sort of set them up for success in the future life of whatever direction they choose to go in, and to help shape, you know, citizens of the world who are people that are well-rounded and have a great understanding and great empathy and who are kind ultimately, and who can communicate. Because I think communication, as you said, is the heart of a lot of talk around behaviour and a lot of support around behaviour has to come back to that. And I think as a school, children are really wonderful here at communicating and are taught really brilliantly. The oracy skills, it's such a high focus in all of our learning. And I think it's drawing those two things together. The better children can communicate, the better we can behaviour with each other and care about each other.
And I see that a lot in year 6. You know, I'm always impressed whenever I'm, you know, it could be a couple of year 6s that something's happened or, you know, whatever it is. And quite often they will use phrases like, well, building on what Anna said, or building on what Verity, you know, they'll use those sort of connecting oracy phrases that they've been taught for several years to try and explain themselves better, rather than just, you know, what they said, you know,
and that
I'm cross and that's that.
That almost is a way of proactively preventing anything from happening, because if they're communicating in that really mature way, there's that possibility of something going wrong in that partner talk or whatever further down the line. I mean, to give an example at the other end of the school, in year 1, for example, we use the phrase, would you like to go first or shall I, when they turn to face their partners. And obviously you teach that at the beginning of the year as a system, but the class now will just do that automatically. And what you're doing there is you're getting rid of the both talking at the same time and then, oh, he's talking over me, she won't let me speak.
We get some active listening going on.
This is it. So, but the children now, you know, as with everything, if you teach children, if you follow a structure and a routine with it, they learn it and they do it on their own. And you know, my class today, I really impressed me because they were doing that with their partners without me prompting them at all. And all you know, you get the children who are, do you mind if I go first this time? And it's really mature. They're 5, most of them, and yet it works so beautifully. And that possibility of anything going wrong in terms of partner, you know, getting kind of annoyed with each other, just vanishes with no effort on my part in that moment, because it'd been set up before. And I think the behaviour policy is so centred around moments like that.
Yeah, I think as well what we see further up in the school is, as this continues, we've seen it already, with when you're having those conversations about a situation that might have happened or an argument or whatever it is, individuals that you speak to, because like you said, we speak to everybody, you'll get the children reflecting as well and being empathetic, going, well, maybe they'd had a bad morning, or maybe they didn't have any breakfast and they were just a bit, you know, hangry or something, and it's not like them, but normally they don't do that, but you know, so they're reflecting, and that's where we are going to be winning with restoring those relationships between them, because like it or not, these children are in the same school for quite a while. So I think they need to get along, right?
They do,
definitely.
And the more, especially when they come in the early years and in the pre-prep, the more we teach them about emotions and identifying emotions that they can identify in themselves, then they can also identify them in other people and start to empathize, which we know is so, you know, empathy is so important in our developing pupils, just so that they understand where people are coming from. And we've got lots of different pupils, lots of different needs, so we all really need to be aware that there are differences.
And that's a really good segue into our last sort of few minutes about inclusion and differences, and how this approach is far more suited to an inclusive school and everything that we strive to be. You know, I think it's no one's going to be left out of this. Everybody can be included.
And I think that's where the curiosity comes in, because we're not making sort of sweeping judgments about a cohort of children as not individuals. And it's the understanding that obviously you've got 16 or 24 pupils with completely different brains, completely different experiences. They've had a completely different start to each day. And it's that understanding that, you know, a one-size-fits-all approach isn't going to work successfully in the long term, whereas this restorative approach is tailored and it is individual, and it will work for anyone. And there is that flexibility for, you know, like, you know, additional needs or what is needed from the way different brains work. And that's why it's such a lovely approach to take with children, because it is so welcoming and inclusive with everyone. And I think every time, and I suppose this is also another homeschool link, every time something happens and maybe it doesn't go to plan and maybe we haven't quite got it right, or at home, you know, you've tried really hard and you've had those conversations and then it happens again. I think as long as we remember that everything is a teaching moment, everything's a learnable moment, and it's not going to happen overnight. We don't expect children to read overnight, so we wouldn't expect them to learn, you know. And I think just remembering that we can learn from everything that happens.
Every experience is valuable, you know,
exactly.
Good, the bad, and the ugly.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think, funnily enough, Mrs. Malanger and I were talking about this today, but you know, when there are sanctions or when there are consequences, whatever they may be, in line with our behaviour policy and our discussions that we have, if your child is involved in a situation with another child, parents are not. We don't tell parents what the consequences or the sanctions are if anybody else was involved. That wouldn't be right. We wouldn't discuss anybody's child with anybody else. I think it's a common question. You know, well, what happened to the other person? Well, we can't discuss that with parents, and we can explain our processes, and we're always happy to talk to parents about how we handle things and how situations occurred, but we just can't give out specifics about other children for safeguarding reasons, obviously. Well, thank you both. I feel much more informed about restorative practice. I hope everybody does too. And this is where I've brought another piece of paper with me, because I always forget to do this. But our next webinar in only a couple of weeks is going to be run by the Wellbeing Hub. All parents have a login to the Wellbeing Hub. We all have logins. It's a fantastic resource. If you haven't logged into your Wellbeing Hub login, please do. And our next webinar is on raising resilient children, hosted by them, and you'll see some more familiar faces along the way. But thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to Ms. Handyside and Mrs. Malangit, and we'll see you again very soon.